Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of the hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The Afghan military says it has killed 17 Taliban fighters while removing their checkpost on Baghlan Balkh highway. The military accused the Taliban of extorting people on the highway. Meanwhile, the Taliban say 4 soldiers were killed in an attack on their checkpoint in the Balkh province. Afghan leader Karim Khalili, along with a delegation, is arriving in Pakistan today on a 3-day visit. The leader of Hizb-e-Wahdat-e-Islami will call on Prime Minister Imran Khan and Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. Islamabad says the visit is part of its policy to reach out to the Afghan political leadership to forge common understanding on the peace process. The United States House of Representatives have decided to impeach President Donald Trump, calling him a threat to democracy. The Democrat-led House plans to introduce a charge of incitement of insurrection over Capitol Hill riots. Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the House will call on Vice President Mike Pence today to wrest the powers of the presidency from Trump. China says it firmly opposes and strongly condemns the US's latest move on Taiwan. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said Beijing will resolutely fight back against any attempts to sabotage its interests. Beijing's response comes after Washington lifted restrictions on contacts between the US officials and their Taiwanese counterparts. The global number of coronavirus has surpassed 19 million, with more than 1.93 million deaths. Meanwhile, Japan has discovered a new variant of the new coronavirus in people arriving from Brazil. China has reported 85 new locally transmitted cases of COVID-19, its biggest daily increase in more than 5 months. In Pakistan, over 1,800 cases and 32 fatalities were recorded overnight. That pushed the death toll to 10,676. And in tennis, 8-seeded French Tiafoe beats follow American John Fratangelo 6-4, 3-6, 6-1 in the second round of Del Rey Beach Open. Tiafoe will now face the winner of the late match pitting British Cameron Norrie and 3rd-seeded French Adrian. In another contest, 4th-seeded Polish Hubert Hurkacz comfortably downs Colombia's Daniel Elahi Galán 6-2 and 6-2. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The Afghan military says it has killed 17 Taliban fighters while removing their checkposts on the Baghlan Balkh highway. The military accused the Taliban of extorting people on the highway. It said the commando forces took part in the operation and they will continue their efforts to block such attempts. The Defense Ministry said it has also killed dozens of Taliban fighters in an airstrike in the Farah province. The ministry said the air raids was carried out during retaliatory attacks in the Pushtrud district. Meanwhile, the Taliban say 4 soldiers were killed in an attack on their checkpost in the Balkh province. Now, Karim Khalili, leader of Afghanistan's Hizb-e-Wahdat-e-Islami, is arriving in Pakistan today on a 3-day visit. Khalili will call on Prime Minister Imran Khan, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi and other dignitaries. Pakistan's Foreign Office says the visit is part of its policy to reach out to the Afghan political leadership to forge common understanding on the peace process. The visit coincides with the second round of the intra-Afghan talks between Kabul and the Taliban in Doha. The two sides are negotiating on the core agenda of the talks after agreeing on the mechanism and terms in round one. Now in Nepal, Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli says he will not rest until he retrieves Nepalese territories from India. This comes days before Nepali Foreign Minister visit to India amid strained bilateral ties. Kumar Gyavali will call on his Indian counterpart to resolve the long-term boundary dispute with talks. Prime Minister Oli said Gyavali will discuss the issue of the map that Kathmandu published last year. He said according to the Sauguauli Treaty, Kalapani, Limpiadhura and Limpulekh belong to Nepal. The release of the map led to opposition from India, with the Ministry of External Affairs criticizing the move. Moving on now, Yemen's Houthi rebels say they reserve the right to respond to any U.S. move to blacklist them. The statement comes after the Trump administration announced its intent to designate the group as a terrorist organization. In a tweet, spokesperson Muhammad Ali al-Houthi alleged the U.S. policies are source of terrorism. Earlier, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. will designate the Houthi group as terrorist organization on the 19th of January. Pompeo said he also wants to designate 3 Ansarallah leaders as global terrorists. He said the move will confront Ansarallah's terrorist activities in Yemen. Earlier, aid groups expressed concerns that the move can complicate efforts to combat the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Now in Iraq, a policeman was killed and dozens of people injured in clashes between anti-government protesters and security forces. Officials say the clashes began in Haboubi Square in the town of Nasiriyah over the arrest of the activist. Security forces used tear gas and batons to disperse the protesters who threw stones and rocks. Occasional gunfire could be heard. Iraq's military said in a statement that 33 other policemen were also injured in the violence. Security officials said at least 18 protesters were injured. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives have decided to move to impeach President Donald Trump, calling him a threat to democracy. This comes after Wednesday's Capitol Hill storming by Trump supporters left 5 people dead. In a letter to her colleague, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the House will call on Vice President Mike Pence to wrest the powers of the presidency from Trump. If Pence does not respond, the Democrats will proceed with impeaching the president for a historic second time. The House plans to introduce a charge of incitement of insurrection over the riots, but no Republican senators have said they will vote to convict him of wrongdoing in the Senate. Meanwhile, China says it firmly opposes and strongly condemns the U.S.'s latest move on Taiwan. The backlash comes after the U.S. lifted restrictions on contacts between Washington and Taiwan officials. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said Beijing will resolutely fight back against any attempts to sabotage its interests. At a briefing, spokesperson Zhao Lijian said the Chinese people's resolve to defend the country's sovereignty is unshakable. He added they will not permit any person or force to stop the process of China's reunification. Earlier, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S.-Taiwan relationship will not be shackled by self-imposed restrictions. Taiwan is a sensitive issue for China, which considers the island a renegade province that must be brought under its rule. Now, the global number of coronavirus have surpassed 90 million, with more than 1.93 million deaths. More on the latest developments regarding COVID-19 around the world in this report.
The optimism fueled by COVID-19 vaccines is dampened as the world witnesses an unprecedented surge in deaths and cases, while new variants of the virus causes worries. Japan has found coronavirus variant in people arriving from Brazil, which is different from the ones in Britain and South Africa. Meanwhile, French authorities are racing to contain the more infectious variant of COVID-19 first found in Britain after detecting it in the ports of Marseille and in the Alps. Mexico and Russia have also confirmed the new strain of the virus first detected in Britain. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the worsening state of global spread and new strands call for a more strengthened global health response.
While the need for international cooperation continues, we must expand our idea of what that means. in our interconnected world, we need a networked multilateralism so that global and regional organizations communicate and work together towards common goals.
Meanwhile, Indonesia has extended its ban on foreign arrivals for another 14 days in a bid to control the transmission of the coronavirus. Spain too is mulling new restrictions after it recorded its biggest one-day jump in coronavirus cases since October. Meanwhile, the US and Britain opened mass vaccination centers to boost immunization drive and deliver shots to all people.
We're 1A currently. However, Governor Cuomo just expanded the criteria to 1B, which will expand beyond healthcare providers starting this week. And we're excited and ready to provide vaccine to that group as well.
Over in Asia, mainland China has reported 85 new locally transmitted cases of COVID-19, its biggest daily increase in more than 5 months.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 32 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. This takes the country's death toll to 10,676. Health officials reported 1,877 new infections overnight. There are currently more than 35,000 active cases in the country. The Health Ministry says out of over 504,000 countrywide cases, more than 458,000 people have recovered. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health has started registering frontline healthcare workers who will receive the first doses of the vaccine. All staff of hospitals dealing with virus patients and healthcare workers appointed to inject vaccines will be immunized as a priority. Now, tensions between Iran and South Korea over the seizure of an oil tanker escalated after talks between the two sides failed. Seoul's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-kun, who arrived in Tehran yesterday, held talks with his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi. State media said Araghchi urged the South Korean delegation to stop politicizing the issue. He also pressed Seoul to release $7 billion in funds frozen amid U.S. sanctions. Jong-kun reassured Tehran that providing access to its frozen funds was one of the priorities of Seoul. Araghchi added South Korea should make way for legal proceedings. Earlier, Iran denied allegations that seizure of the tanker and its 20-member crew amounted to hostage-taking. Moving on, South Korea says it remains committed to engaging with North Korea. In his annual New Year's speech, President Moon Jae-in said Seoul's willingness to talks with Pyongyang remains unchanged. Moon said dialogue and prosperity with key drivers of the peace process on the Korean peninsula. He said cooperation on issues like the coronavirus pandemic can lead to breakthrough in stalled talks. Moon added he will make last-ditch efforts for a development in stalemated North Korea, US and inter-Korean talks. Meanwhile, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been elected as General Secretary of the ruling Workers' Party. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's move on with the news stories. Talks between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan to resolve the Nile Dam dispute have broken down again. Sudan expressed frustration after the latest round of virtual talks stalled. In a statement, Sudanese Irrigation Minister Yasir Abbas said the vicious cycle of talks cannot continue. But Cairo and Addis Ababa blamed Khartoum's objections to the framework for the impasse. Ethiopian Foreign Ministry said Sudan objected to terms of reference by African Union experts. Meanwhile, African Union Chair Naledi Pandor voiced her regret that the talks had reached a dead end. Now, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, armed attackers have killed 6 guerrilla rangers and wounded several others in an ambush in the eastern Virunga National Park. A spokesman of the park said the identity of the culprits was not yet clear, but said a group of armed men attacked their positions in the middle of the park. Over 200 rangers have been killed in the past, including 12 last April. Dozens of armed groups still operate in eastern Congo, with many remnants of militias that fought in the civil wars. In Ethiopia, the military says it has killed 15 members of the Tigray's former ruling party and captured 8 others. According to the state-run TV, those captured include the former president, Abiy Weldu. It said the region's former deputy police commissioner is among those killed. The government declared victory in its conflict with the Tigray People's Liberation Front on 28th of November after a month of fighting. But fugitive leaders of the TPLF had vowed to continue to fight from the mountains. Airstrikes and battles since early November in Tigray are believed to have killed thousands of people. Earlier, the UN said fighting is continuing in some parts with over 2 million people in need of aid. Saudi Arabia has unveiled plans to build a zero-carbon city within the projected NEOM zone. It is the first major construction project for the $500 billion flagship businesses zone aimed at diversifying the economy. Let's find out more in this report.
There has been great interest around NEOM ever since its first announcement in 2017, with the mega development project being promoted as something straight out of science fiction. Based in northwestern Saudi Arabia, the zone is slated to be built from scratch on a 26,500 square kilometer area and link Jordan and Egypt via Saudi territory. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced the launch of a zero-carbon city called The Line in the zone. He says the city will extend over 170 kilometers and will be able to house 1 million residents. It will have facilities like schools, health centers, and green spaces.
Today, as the chairman of the board of directors of NEOM, I present to you The Line, 1 million people city with a length of 170 kilometers that preserves 95% of the nature within NEOM's land. Zero cars, zero streets, and zero carbon dioxide emission. One will be able to run their daily errands in just a 5 minutes walk, and one will be able to travel from the farthest point to the other in 20 minutes. With a 30% reduction in infrastructure cost, a 30% increase in the quality of product offered, and with 100% renewable energy.
An official says construction will start in the first quarter of 2021. A NEOM statement says the city is expected to contribute $48 billion to the kingdom's gross domestic product and create 380,000 jobs.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had a heavy emotional and material toll. So a seamstress in Mexico is trying to fill in the void left by those who lost the fight against the virus. Details in this report.
At her workshop in the northern border city of Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, Arendida Guerrero makes teddy bears for the family and friends of COVID-19 victims to console them. Each bear carries a message of love written on labels as a memory and addressed to the family members.
To people who have lost their family members to COVID, in this case, they bring the clothes of their loved ones which at one stage they used to wear the most, with what they were most remembered for, and then we make them this beautiful bear.
Guerrero started making the bears in March 2020. Araceli Ramirez, who recently lost her father to COVID-19, received her teddy bear made with material from a shirt used by her beloved father.
I think I will keep the teddy bear in my office, where I work, where I am most of the time, and I want him to be with me while I come to terms with this reality.
Residents in Ciudad Juarez on the border with Texas have lost thousands of loved ones due to the high rates of COVID-19. And officials say the real number of infected people and deaths is likely significantly higher than the official count due to little testing.
European stocks are trading just under the flat line as coronavirus weighs on investor sentiment. Frankfurt's DAX is leading the losses, dipping over 0.5%. The pan-European stock 600 has also slipped, with utilities and travel stocks dropping. London's FTSE and Italy's FTSE MIB declined marginally, while the CAC 40 in Paris too edged down. Earlier, Asian stocks traded mixed with mainland. We'll keep you updated with all the latest with this and all the news from around the world. Till then, keep watching Indus News.